Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where you think we completely missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. Rumble is a great place to leave comments, or our other social media channels. Well, Happy New Year, Brian.
Happy New Year. And for those listening, I think most people think like you and I are buddies and we hang out all the time. I have not spoken to you in 3 weeks, right?
Yeah,
Since we did the last episode. Yeah. We exchanged voicemails, I think, once, and we texted maybe 4 times. But this is truly like Happy New Year. Good to see you, and I hope you had a great holiday season.
Yeah, you too.
So there's a million things going on. The news cycle is like fast and furious. There's no question. But before we get to that, so I'm a football fan. I took a couple years off watching football, but like I would previously, when playoff football hits, which is we're coming up into that season now, like middle to late January. I would not go on vacation those weekends. I mean, I love football.
That's
right?
Hardcore.
Again, took a couple weeks off or a couple years off when they got, they did their woke stuff, and it was too much for me. And so, but I'm back in now. They've kind of tapered all that down. Right. And anyhow, the thing that occurred to me that I thought would be funny for you and I to kind of talk about, I'd love to get your take on this. One of the things I know, I watched a lot of football this last weekend and the weekend before that. And one of the things I noticed is there's a lot more hyphenated names than there was. I mean, when I was a kid, like you would meet somebody once in a great while that had a hyphenated name, but now, like every team has like 5 or 6 guys who have a hyphenated last name.
Yeah. And
so I was wondering, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Like, how does this work 3 generations from now? So, for example, you have Man A, whose last name, let's just say I just pick some randomly, right? But these are actual people with these last names. But so Dude A has a last name of Green Ellis. So it's hyphenated dad, and presumably mom's last name, which ironically was her dad's last name in most cases. Yeah. Right. So we're not giving our full name to our dad. We're giving half to our dad and half to our mom's dad. So that's kind of how that works out, right? You got Dude A, whose last name is Green Ellis, and he marries woman A, whose last name is Diggins Smith, let's say. And then they have a kid. So what does the kid do? Does the kid do the same policy where the kid's last name becomes Green Ellis Diggins Smith?
Well, if they want to start a law firm, sure.
So that's only one generation. So now let's say there's woman B with the last name of Carter Williams, who marries man B, Caldwell Pope, and they have a kid. So now it's Caldwell Pope, Carter Williams. Right? So that kid has 4 names. Now, if those 2 kids who each have 4 names get married, and the wife does the new traditional thing, she could have a last name of Green Ellis Diggins Smith, Caldwell Pope, Carter Williams.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
So my question is, what's the end game with this? Like, where's this supposed to go? Like, how is this supposed to work?
I think the end game is, I'm just John Smith. I think, well, so there's 2 possibilities, so, and I am not an expert in Indian culture, but there's some cultures in the world where they have these big, huge, monstrously long, names that.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Homages to ancestors and such. And, so you can have somebody with a super long name or some, combination of names. So it could go that direction. But given the general kind of laziness and desire for everything to be microwaved in 30 seconds, I'm guessing that when the second generation comes along and says, we got to string together these 4 names, no, I'm not going there. I'm just going back to the ancestor from the Civil War. His name is Smith, so I'm going to be John Smith. I think I would bet money that's the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting crossroads between ease and laziness and simplicity versus making a statement and doing something to stand out.
Well, and I think what happens, so I think you can look at this generationally, as you and I oftentimes like to do. I think you can look and say, okay, well, women's suffrage took place in, what, the 1920s. It's
around 1920, 1919, 1920, somewhere in there.
just right about 100 years ago, right? And so as soon as that happened, then there was more and more and more, women included in more things in society, women's liberation, just all of these different things. And so pay equality. So all these different things happen. Those are all good things. I'm not criticizing those good things. I'm not saying take away the right to vote. But so all these things happen, and then it's like, okay, well, what else can we change? Well, another sign of the patriarchy. We just take the man's name as the kids.
Yeah.
Let's take the man's and the woman's name. And eventually, so you go down this path until you reach a place where it's like, maybe we should have the dogs with all of our ancestors' names too, just because we don't want to, leave anybody out. So eventually, sort of inclusion reaches its ultimate goal, and it's like, well, there's no other territory that we need to fix, and so it's like, just pick which one you like. Okay, so John's going to have his mother's name and his mother's maiden name, and Mary's going to have her father's maiden,
his mother's maiden name, which is his mother's father's name.
That's right.
In most cases.
I just think it's the evolution of how these things go socially, and eventually the whole thing.
The part that cracks me at the most is, no, I'm taking my mom's last name. Okay, well, where did she get the name? Well,
her dad.
From her dad.
Yeah,
okay, so
yeah, so there. Well, you can't really enforce rules of consistency on these things. It's just, it's just feeling.
By the way, would you agree that Wyoming is one of the most conservative states in the union?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably top 3, maybe top 2, depending on what metric you measure by. Wyoming was the first state that gave women the right to vote. Just FYI on that.
Oh, that's good.
And I only know that because I was born in Wyoming.
Well, good.
All right, so there's yes, that's right. Good trivia. There's no shortage of things going on. A couple of things, and I'll give you plenty of time, of course, to talk about what you want to talk about as well. But giving Kenny G a little glimpse. Again, Kenny G is the guy we're talking to who 70 years from now will be looking back at this period of time, wondering what the hell we were thinking, what was going on, how could all this be happening? I'm certain of that. Dave and I try to cover things that probably won't make the history books, but are meaningful in kind of how our culture is unfolding. Like we're just trying to explain like what it's like to live in this time. And so things that we talk about are, again, they're not likely to be historically remembered, which is why we talk about them. We don't need to cover the things. We don't need to cover who won the election because the history books will be full of that kind of stuff. There's one thing that stood out to me. I saved a couple of clips over our break. And one thing that stood out to me, I'm going to read you 2 stories. One is from Germany, and one is from England. The one for now, again, I have no idea if this stuff is true. The people who I save these things from generally appear to me to be credible sources. They're not John 1, 2, 3, 4. Like these are people with names that you would like. Patrick Bet David is one of them, and there's people who have names that you would recognize that are not likely to be pushing along phony information. But that said, I would have no idea if they are, right?
Sure.
It's talking about how crimes are being treated in Europe right now. So here's a headline from the Publica. I don't know where that's from. Probably from Germany. Here's the headline of the article. Woman convicted of quote unquote offending migrant gang rapist receives longer prison sentence than the rapist. So
that's insane.
So that's one, and then the other. This is again from Patrick Bet David. Neighbors hear screams from a house. They call the police. This is in England. The British police find a 13-year-old girl naked and drunk with 7 Pakistani men.
Oh my!
Police arrest the girl and convict her, and they don't even question the 7 men. The 7 men just walk. She gets convicted of being drunk. Right. Presumably inside a building, inside a house.
Right.
Not a lot of damage can be done there, I don't think. The 7 dudes that are adults there that are around, they walk. Uh, and there's a number of these stories. I only saved a couple, but there's a number of these stories where people in England are being, charged, convicted,
Yeah.
imprisoned, fined, whatever,
Yeah.
for saying quote unquote offensive things. Meanwhile, like rapes have gone through the roof,
Right.
stabbings have gone through the roof, like all these, like, in my opinion, much more meaningful crimes
Yeah. Horrific.
are kind of going unchecked. What do you make of that, Dave?
Well, it's the natural outcome of identity politics gone crazy, and identity social explosion gone crazy. So, you take actual crime and depreciate it. So, like rape, that's kind of a bad thing, and most places people think that's pretty bad, along the lines of murder, etc. But so you take the identity politics and say yes, but this is a protected group. So anything that this protected group, immigrants, for instance. So if there's a lot of concern across Europe right now, and in fact, it's showing up at the ballot box too. There's a lot of concern about immigrants in Europe, and so that's why you're finding far right, in quotes, if anybody's listening in audio, politicians getting more and more and more seats in their various parliaments and getting more positions of power. So that automatically, to the other side, makes the immigrant population untouchable. And in a commitment to that untouchability, even native born children that become attacked by immigrant groups, well, we still got to protect the immigrant groups, because the identity is everything. And I mean, it's Keir Starmer, who's the current PM in England, is under a great pressure, and rightly so, for ignoring like the Pakistani rape gangs and such, and not taking any significant action. I mean, it's a serious issue even in the mainstream press, and so I think that's. I mean, I know that's what's happening, and there's until that commitment to law and order for everybody becomes sacrosanct, instead of just saying this group is oppressed, so therefore they get a pass on virtually anything. Then this is going to continue.
Yeah. So my question for you then, because I consider you to be a pretty wise guy, not a smart ass. I mean, you're that too sometimes, but you're a wise man, I should say, not a wise guy. You're not in the mob, and you're not generally a smart ass. But
right.
You and I talked about this, I don't know, well over a year ago, that I think you and I both agree there's no hierarchy amongst races.
Right.
Like the people's character should vastly outweigh whatever immutable characteristics they have. Right. However, culture and values does matter.
Sure.
And so my question is, are the people who are like this whoever's all for, there's a lot of people, a group of people somewhere, a cohort, who thinks this is the right thing, that the 7 Pakistani men walk and the girl gets arrested.
Right.
There's a cohort that believe that's good.
Yeah.
Right. Do they believe that, are they mistakenly conflating race and culture and values, or are they not making that mistake and they just want to tear down Western civilization? And I'm not trying to like embellish that, but to whatever degree, you and I would never know. But like, is the aim to take down the culture we grew up in, or are they just conflating things that are kind of easy to conflate? Like, it's kind of easy to say, well, race equals culture, and it's you have to take some time to think through separating those things.
I think both of those things are true simultaneously. I think because on one hand, anything that I think you have to remember there's a dichotomy here. There's a dichotomy between oppressed and oppressor, colonized and colonizer. So there's two sides of the same coin. There's you're either oppressed or you're the oppressor. And so whatever puts you in that oppressed group, immigrant status, race, culture, any of those things puts you in that group. Now, once you're in that group, there's a certain set of rules that apply to you. Very few. It would seem there's very few that apply. And once you're in the other group, even if you are not a rich person, even if you're just your average, English bloke on the street, you still have a different set of rules that are applied to you because of your status as in the oppressor class. And so, and yes, and when I say both of the two, propositions you made are true, the idea that Western society needs to be torn down. Now, they wouldn't say it that way, but well, actually 20% of them would. Well, probably
some would, yeah, for sure.
Some would, yes, some would. But the idea that it needs to be torn down is part of that because it's a tearing down an oppressive society. So
Yeah.
when you have people that are oppressed in any form, because you have to have an ultimately equal utopian, valued society where everybody is identical in terms of outcome. If you don't have that, then you have an oppressor matrix, and that's what leads to all this.
So, I mean, if you just fast forward 2 steps, it seems fairly obvious to me that that's not how this goes. This will end. Like, okay, let's say the Pakistani guys get carte blanche to do whatever they want. As I said, there is a hierarchy. We all have a hierarchy of cultures and values.
Yes.
And I don't mean all of us, meaning just Americans. I mean, I'm guessing there's guys in Syria who think less of me because I'm not Muslim, or
Right. Sure.
I don't believe in a faith / government entity to rule the world. Like they,
yeah.
So they think less of me because I don't share those values, and I think less of them because they think it's okay to do things I don't agree with. Right. So I don't mean that like the disparity or the us looking down at other cultures is uniquely us.
Right.
we all kind of, this is, often what leads to wars and all that kind of stuff. It's human nature, right?
Yeah.
But if you just take that scenario and fast forward a couple decades where you have a group of people, whatever the reason, you have this group of people who are left-handed or have red hair or one leg is a half an inch shorter than the other, whatever it is, doesn't matter. They get carte blanche, whatever they want. How could it go any other way than those people just terrorizing the rest of the civilization?
It can't. It can't go any other way, and it also can't go any other way than people go through that sort of mind shift in society that you and I've talked about before. The first one's like, well, that's an exception. I don't think it really happened. I think maybe somebody's inflating that beyond what it's worth. Well, yeah, maybe they did that, but they're not going to go the next step. And the final one is, well, they wouldn't really do that, would they? They wouldn't go that far, would they? And then when society goes through that entire kind of mental emotional process to get to that point, then they're like, they are doing that, and that's not right, and it offends my common sense and my sense of justice, and now I'm pushing back. So and we're at that point. We've gone through those other stages, and now we're at that point. And so and that's why it's going the other direction. That's why, you've got, so Keir, again, back to the PM of England, of the UK, Keir Starmer he's pretty much brand new in his position. And he's been there for just a number of months now. And, he's getting plenty of pushback, and people even on his own side think, you can't really cover this up. This is just not a good thing. You've got Marine Le Pen in France, who used to be, her father, they talked about as a Nazi, he was a neo-Nazi or far right, and she's in a significant position of power. You've got the shakeup in Germany that's happening with, well, I won't go into all the parties, but anyway, you've got these shakeups happening all across Europe. And it's really, in what's driving it, a lot of what's driving the same thing, a lot of what drove our election here is anti-open immigration and going too far in letting anybody come in. So it's not I hesitate to say anti-immigration. It's not an anti-immigration sentiment at all. It's an anti-open immigration,
it's an anti-invasion sentiment, I think.
Exactly.
And I'm not being sarcastic there. I'm being serious about that. Yeah.
And it's an different rules for them than for us.
And we like our culture, and we like our values, and we like what makes us special, and we like what is unique about us, and we like that, anyhow, I think I think it's one of those, like, there's, a ton of little tiny things that add to the the straw on the camel's back that leads to the camel's back breaking in the fourth turning. And this is like, feels like one of those things where we just make these emotional judgments, but they're short-sighted. They're not based in what I would consider reality. They're kind of based on fantasy land and like this utopian outcome and whatever. And then people do it. But then enough people get, my theory is enough people get hurt in firsthand, not like, meaning they don't know somebody who knows somebody who gets hurt, like their neighbor gets hurt. And it's like, whoa, that's right next door. Then they start coming, they wake up. And then certainly if it happens to them, and but the momentum has already been going for a while, and now it takes even more effort and force to overcome the momentum.
Yeah,
and that's where the clashes begin to happen. It's kind of what it feels like to me. And there's all these little things, like this is one little thing out of maybe dozens or hundreds of these kinds of things. Where we talk about institutions falling apart. That's one. People giving up their values in little incremental pieces, saying, they wouldn't go that far. They wouldn't do that. And then they do that. And then they go, holy crap, we're in a bad situation here. And it affected me personally. Now I have to push back.
And that's what you find in a number of places. And it's fascinating to me that there's a lot of these things happening simultaneously. So the pushback against the pseudoscience gender ideology is pretty dramatic right now. So for a while, it's like, well, there's not very many of them. It's kind of oppressed. I heard a statistic today that I think it was AP put out a story that says, well, fewer than 1 in 1,000 youth in America have been treated with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, trying to sort of excuse it. So there's that. But people are looking at those things, and the people are looking at it. Of all things that has really stuck on that one in particular, women's sports. Women's sports has created an incredible backlash. I mean, you've got just across the board, you've got the fall of DEI is to a great extent because of that, and because of unfair treatment of people based on the color of their skin, based on their race. So all these things happening simultaneously says that there's sort of a cultural awakening, if you will. Well, another one we can talk about later. I won't hijack this point, but the change in Zuckerberg and Facebook. So later on, let me forget. I want to talk about that.
Yeah, I figured you'd bring that up. So there's one other thing I want to get to that kind of ties in what we're talking about. And you would think, okay, well, these people are pushing this stuff. It must make them happy, right? It must. It certainly gives them purpose. I believe it gives them purpose. But you would think it would make them happy. And then this video pops up to indicate that maybe it doesn't make them so happy. And so I'm going to share my screen here and play this. It's about a minute-long clip. And we'll just see what this guy says about happiness, and we'll take it from there.
10 years ago, you wrote, conservative women seem to be particularly blissful. About 40% say they're very happy. That makes them slightly happier than conservative men and significantly happier than liberal women.
Yeah.
The unhappiest of all are liberal men. Only about a fifth consider themselves very happy.
That was true 10 years ago. Liberal women have overtaken liberal men as the unhappiest group. You find that particularly young women, very interesting new data show that white liberal women under 30 have almost a 6 in 10 chance of having been diagnosed with a mental illness in America today. It's a really big problem. And there's lots of speculation on what that has to do with politics, what has to do with race, what has to do with age, et cetera, et cetera. But what you find is that this is a group that's really, really struggling. And it's a pity because it's not good for them. It's not good for society. And that's what we see. So I don't think that being a political conservative is a panacea for being a happy person, but we see disproportionately these happiness and unhappiness effects in different parts of the population for sure.
So what do you make of that then, Dave? So like this stuff is all supposed to, again, I believe it does give people purpose to like have a purpose in life, to like, we're going to reshape society and we're going to be looked upon as the greatest generation. Okay. But it's not making them happy though. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to feeling guilty for the privilege, quote unquote, that they have. You notice that so much of the progressive, I'm not going to even say liberal, but I'll say progressive. So much of the progressive agenda is about privilege. So, I mean, even if you reframe that oppressed matrix, you could reframe it around privilege. And so, I think a lot of people then are like, well, I have privilege, so therefore I feel guilty. Well, okay, so if your primary motivating emotion is that you feel guilty, then you're probably going to be, even if you're assuaging your guilt in some way, you're probably going to be unhappy because it's a negative emotion.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're thinking of conservatives, usually conservatives are like they're pro family, they're pro business, they're pro achievement, and pro six. They're pro a lot of things. Now, of course the progressives would frame it differently. Well, you're anti-abortion,
Yeah.
you're anti-trans, or whatever. They would frame it that way. But for the most part, those on our side of the aisle are pro a lot of positive things that drive society forward, as opposed to being driven primarily by guilt over the privilege that they have. And I've heard people talk about how poor people in the South voted disproportionately for Trump, but so they say they're voting against their interest because Trump is going to take away all the stuff that poor people need. He's going to take away all the government programs, missing the fact that they're looking at it from, again, a pro perspective. Things are going to go better. I'm poor. Things are going to go better for me. So I'm, looking for that more optimistic future, that more, not driven by guilt, not driven by, oh, my great, 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 great grandfather was a bad guy in the Civil War. Well, he can't really do anything about that. So I think it comes back to that as a motivating explanation.
It's funny you say that. I didn't say this clip because I didn't think it'd be germane to our podcast, but I watched a clip today where they've studied human life longevity, and they look at all the different factors and things like that, and they figure, okay, well, of course, diet, exercise, income, that kind of thing. All those things, of course, be factors. But the point this particular video was making was that the overarching theme was none of those things. It was the quality of relationships people had.
Sure.
That is what led to longevity in life. And so I think that, and I'm certainly biased in what I'm about to say, and I could be wrong, but it's my belief that the progressive folks are pushing this, and the more conservative folks like us are resisting, rather than us pushing for an agenda and them resisting. It feels much more like we're playing defense and they're playing offense, right?
Yeah.
So they're pushing for this stuff that leads to more tribalism. And again, I'm biased in that. I'm not saying that conservative people aren't tribalistic right now. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying the team playing offense is pushing this stuff that leads to more tribalism, which diminishes relationships, which I would imagine makes you unhappy.
Yeah, it's
right?
self-defeating. I think that's it. I think it is ultimately self-defeating, because it's like because one, you're never going to achieve a perfectly utopian egalitarian society. It's not possible, and so your ultimate goal you can't achieve, and so you're always going to be unhappy. You're always going to feel guilty, and I mean that's no formula for a positive, happy life.
No, and this will be a good segue into your Zuckerberg thing, but and I'm going to be a little bit snarky here. I'll just warn you about this, but
Okay.
I also I can't help but think that part of the reason they're unhappy is because their batting average of being quote unquote right is really, really low.
Yeah.
The things that they've been saying that are the way they are, whether it be COVID and vaccines and gender this and kids transitioning, and like, let's not worry about how many kids change their mind when they're adults. Like,
Right.
New York Times, like calling things conspiracy theories, and then 18 months later, and then 12 months later, and then 6 months later, and then 3 days later, like, okay, those actually weren't conspiracy theories. Like, their batting average is pretty low, I would say.
Yeah.
That would make me unhappy.
Well, I think what the connected point to that is that would make me unhappy, and what would really make me unhappy is not being able to admit that I was wrong.
Right.
Because
or to your friends.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Because if you think about all of those things that you mentioned and 100 more, it's like, did you see a bunch of people writing apology cards to Trump about the laptop, or about the Russia game,
or the collusion thing?
Collusion. Did you see any of that happen? No, of course not.
Yeah.
But that
Biden pardoned his son preemptively for the crimes Trump was impeached for investigating.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so so you in order to live in that mindset, you have to realize that you're involved in cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
this is true, but I have to believe this. So there's, and the people that are truly committed to that are so committed to that that reality doesn't even get a voice. But that doesn't mean that they don't have some sense of everything I say is wrong, and therefore I'm not happy.
Yeah, well, like you guys say, like gravity always wins. Reality always wins.
Right.
And so you can fight it all you want, but there's a piece of your brain, there's a piece of your consciousness, or subconsciousness, maybe somewhere. I gotta believe signals are getting through here and there. Like something's not quite right. Anyhow, that was meant to be a segue into your meta thing, because along the lines of things that have been foisted upon us to be proven untrue, you can pick up the story about Mr. Zuckerberg.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, it's a major earthquake in the social media and just media sphere and communications in general. So, so one, Zuckerberg changed his hair in the past year or two. So that's
yeah, man. He's when he had that UFC thing, like he took on an early '80s skateboarder look with his hair, man.
He did. So go Zuck, right? And second, he didn't just do an announcement, but he did a video explaining why they're changing their entire policy, basically saying, well, we went along with the government, we had good intentions, we're trying to be more inclusive, and then also the government came and they pushed this, they pushed us to push some people down and ditch, promoting people like Ben Shapiro or others, and we didn't push back enough. We shouldn't have done that. And so now what we're doing is we're getting rid of all fact checkers, and we're going to go strictly with community notes. So if you want to object to something, if you want to bring up something counter, you can do that, and you'll do it in community notes, because Zuckerberg says we want to be, once again, a free speech platform. He came back and he said, look, he had that Georgetown a presentation he did like 5 years ago or something, and he talked about how he wanted Facebook to be a free speech platform. What he originally did when he created Facebook in the first place was to create this platform for connections, et cetera, college campuses first, and then beyond that. And so he basically just a finger in the eye to the establishment. The fascinating thing too, one of the fascinating things I loved about that announcement was he said, we're not going to do fact checkers anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to do like they do on X. We're going to do like they do on X. I mean, if
so he's following, like, Elon's the most hated conservative behind Trump right now, I would say. And Elon, I would not say is conservative. I think that he's more like me. Like he's now considered far right extremist. But 12 years ago, I was center left, center right, depending on the year, depending on the issue. I kind of feel like Elon's that way. Yeah. I think it's wonderful that he's following in the footsteps. Again, this is like, you foisted this belief upon people, and then reality turns around and says, "Nah, that's not really how it works."
Well, and good for him.
Well, maybe I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt. However, X is the biggest platform in the world now.
Yes,
Facebook used to be.
Yep.
Right. So I even billionaires care about losing millions of dollars monthly. I'm going to get, so you can't dismiss the financial component.
Right.
Now, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not completely squashing the thing. There's a thing that he said that I'll bring up here in a second that I really, really, really appreciated, but you can't dismiss the financial motive. Sure. You can't dismiss the status and prestige motive of, like, I was the guy and now I'm second fiddle to Elon.
Right.
You can't dismiss the preemptive get out of jail free card this is kind of sort of going to allow, like, hey, we did what we were supposed to do, and like, look, we reversed course, and so like, please don't put me don't try me and put me in jail or fine me or whatever, right? And then there's the piece of it just sucks to be on Facebook and have an opinion that people don't like. And again, not just financial, not just status, but it's also an inferior product, right?
Sure.
So I don't think we can dismiss those things and say, oh, of course he's doing this because he's an altruistic, great guy. I want to believe that that's true. And I'm sure there's an element of that. Well, I don't think we can just like say, well, you forget these other things. He doesn't care about the money. He doesn't care about the status.
No, of course not. But here's the thing, Brian, connecting to our previous conversation, the reason I can give him credit is because if he were a hardcore, progressive, reality be damned. It doesn't matter. I'm going to
Yeah.
stick with this. I'm going to, so
Agreed.
he's adapting to reality as it is. And so
Yeah.
even if a bunch of it's self-serving, great, go for it. That's fine. I
Yeah.
don't care. At least he's responding to reality instead of saying, no, trans women are women. No, you know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. The thing that he said, and I loved all the points you made of what he said. He said some really great things.
Yeah.
I think again, motives. Well, he still did it though. I'm right there with you.
Right.
One of the things he said that really made me happy, maybe the happiest of all of them, was and I'm paraphrasing here. I only watched the video one time, but he essentially said some version of the U.S. is the beacon of true north for free speech.
Yeah.
And when we're compromised, other countries follow suit. And because we're at 10 on free speech and the next best one is at 8.5 or whatever, when we fall to a 7, they all fall below that. Like
Right.
nobody's going to take the lead from us on this front. So,
Right.
and he pointed out that we are the leader of the world on free speech. And it was great to hear him say that. I thought that was my favorite parts of the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I love that too, because he took a number of controversial positions when it comes to the progressive agenda, quoting Elon Musk, who's, like you say, the most hated man in tech circles these days by the progressives, saying the United States isn't uniquely guilty, but is uniquely special in its promotion of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and ideas. These are risky things to do in Silicon Valley, but yet he did it. So now also back to our previous point too, we'll see how well this sticks after the next 4 years. Is it truly only self-serving, or does he have a real commitment to? I have this sense that he has this as a set of principles that he adheres to at least some extent. Now,
Well, I would argue that, and earlier I was joking about him getting in the MMA stuff, which he is. Like I can't remember which fight it was. He came out with the entourage and whatever. Like I think he's immersed in that world. That world is all about personal responsibility.
Sure.
That world is all about life sucks sometimes, but you suck it up and get after it anyway.
Right.
I don't think you can be immersed in that world and not have it affect you if you come in with a polar different viewpoint.
Right.
You're the average of the 5 people you hang out with most. If you go from hanging out with only people who have very progressive ideas to now immersing yourself in a world where they have much more conservative and personal responsibility views and values, I got to figure that has an impact, and I think that is maybe a piece. It's certainly not the biggest piece, but I think that's a factor.
Yeah, and he's also, the other thing you got to say about the guy is he started all of this when he was young and impressionable in college, and he's getting a little bit older. He's married. He's, so some things are, sort of. I would hope it kind of goes back to that old saying that if you're not liberal when you're young, you're heartless, and if you're not conservative when you're older, you're brainless. It could be that.
Also, let's not dismiss the power and the force of the U.S. government.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we all like to say, "Well, I wouldn't do that." Listen, they're going to come take away all your stuff and put you in jail. And they're in his case, they're like one of a handful of entities that can actually pull that off.
Right.
I don't know that it'd be easy for me to say, well, of course I wouldn't have done that, but I don't have that many billions of dollars and a half of an island in Hawaii to lose.
Yeah, especially when it's the FBI and it's from the White House itself.
This isn't the IRS.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. They're scary enough as it is. So I think all of those things are true. I think it is he's a sign of a cultural inflection point, though. He did say, he thought that this was a societal kind of inflection point. He used a different term. But if that is indeed true, then he's smelling the tea leaves and seeing where it's going. He's going to respond to the times that he's in. But that would also, if you think about it, if you think he's in touch with things because he's got a view of things that's way above what our view of things is because of the people he gets involved with. If that really is an inflection point, and he feels safe to say this, then that kind of bodes well for the future.
Yeah, I would. Whatever his motives are, I'm leaning towards this is likely to stick more than it's likely to go away in 4 years.
Yeah, I think so. I do think so.
Yeah. Well, what else you got, Dave? I got one or two other things if you don't have anything, but if you got something, I'll let you take it.
Jump into it.
So the big story right now, it seems to me, is are we going to buy Greenland? Are we going to take over the Panama Canal by whatever means necessary? And is Canada going to become the 51st state? Now, there's no way.
You got to add one more. Is it going to be the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America?
Yeah, I'm dismissing that one because I think that's smoke and mirrors to distract people. But
going to take over the Gulf of Mexico too.
But if you would have told me at any point up until 5.5 weeks ago that we might legitimately be considering another Louisiana Purchase type thing or Alaska type purchase, I would have said, "No way! Like, what? Where would you?" And it's showing you how ignorant I am. I didn't even know that Greenland was part of Denmark. I thought Greenland was its own country. I didn't even know that it was part of Denmark until, again, a month ago. So what do I know about anything? But there's no way I would have predicted that we would be even discussing that. Now, how legitimate it is, I don't know. Now, I'll pass that to you. But it seemed unfathomable to me 2 months ago.
Yeah, no, I would not have suspected. I mean, I see the strategic value of it because of the Arctic Circle, and it's. I mean, Truman talked about buying Greenland. So it's happened in the past as well. People have talked about that, but I never would have believed that anybody was audacious enough to say we're going to buy this massive chunk of land in the North Atlantic. And
I mean, it looks bigger than Texas to me. I mean, it looks bigger than Alaska to me. It's got to, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact number of hundreds of thousands, millions of square miles or whatever. I don't know, but it is massive. I've flown over it before. I remember flying over it, and you're just for like a whole long period of time, you just look down. There's just this big, massive ice sheet. I mean, there's almost nobody there. It's just on the coast down,
just on the coastline. Yeah,
just on the southern coastline, and it is strategically very, very important because one of the great strategic areas in the world right now is the Arctic, especially since the Arctic is now passable since the ice melt has been increased up there. So it's one, I would never have predicted it. I would not. Two, it's brilliant. Three, if anybody could pull it off, it's Trump. I mean, it's like,
no way Obama could have pulled this off. No way Bush could have pulled this off.
No.
Clinton, no way.
No.
I mean, you would have to go back to, the 1800s probably to find. I mean, I was going to say, Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah. So he was what, 1912, 1916, somewhere, 1908, something like that. He would have been able to pull it off. Yeah.
He was audacious enough to do that. So it takes somebody audacious. And, the prime minister of Denmark says, no, it's not for sale. But that's what they always say until you come up with the right number. I mean, it's not like Denmark.
Many homes and pieces of art have been sold, but the first answer was it's not for sale.
Right. I mean, so what happens if the United States goes in and buys a bunch of land there, and all of a sudden we own all the land there anyway? Or what happens if there's you think about it, if you're somebody who lives on Greenland, it's like, okay, we could have our benefactor being Denmark, great country, nice people, windmills, agriculture, it's good folks. Or we could have the most powerful country in the history of humanity as our benefactor. I wonder where I want to be. So
and also don't forget, Denmark is one of the countries being overrun with immigrants.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So
and their political circle or influences are going to change if that continues.
Right. Well, so imagine this. Imagine if there is a right wing, I'll just use the common terminology, a right wing prime minister and a right wing sort of takeover of the Danish government. And then it's like a lot of those people are admirers of Trump. And they're like, well, what can we get out of the United States? Well, why don't we send you half your GDP again on top of what you already get? And let's see how that works out for you. Right. So we have a strong.
So we only got a few minutes left here. So give me an idea where you think there. So a 10 would be, of course, it's going to happen. And a 1 would be no way in hell it's going to happen. What do you think?
I think it's about a 7, honestly. I think there's a good chance it could happen. I didn't think so.
You think this is a legitimate possibility? Okay.
I do. And I think, and specifically, I think it's legitimate because it's not just a whim, because it is strategically super valuable to us against Russia.
Yeah. And huge landmass, very small population. It's not like it's not like we're not talking about taking over, multiple cities the size of London or something like that. We're talking very, very small population.
Right.
It wouldn't take a whole lot to change sentiment there. People who may very well be on board with the idea.
Right.
So sparsely populated, but a huge landmass. And what else are you going to do with it if you don't use it for the purposes Trump has in mind? Like, what else are you going to do with it besides take the oil out and things like that, which presumably they're already doing anyway.
Right.
Okay. So let's move on to the next one that seems the most plausible to me: the Panama Canal. What do you think about that situation?
Well, I think I will tell you. Going back, I remember this. I remember when Jimmy Carter was proposing giving the Panama Canal back, and you might find this hard to believe, but I was very political back in those days as well, even though I was a kid, and I was strongly opposed to that, even though I was 12 years old.
63? You were 63 back when that happened, probably.
Yeah, now I'm 103. So I was incredibly opposed to it then, and I thought it was a terrible idea. It was a terrible idea. We never should have done it. Carter never should have done it. We should have maintained it. It's a strategic asset.
And we built it.
We built the doggone thing. We were running it just fine. And the Panamanians have had terrible troubles with it. Even, I understand their position. I get their position. I'm sympathetic towards their position. I think that one is 40% just because of the surrounding countries, because of the
interesting. I pegged that one higher. Higher than Greenland, meaning. Okay.
Well, it is a strategic asset, there's no doubt, and the Panamanians are struggling. So the only reason I think it's even possible is because the Panamanians have been really struggling with water. Interestingly, the big problem with the Panama Canal, you wouldn't think this, but the big problem that they have is water. They got to get, because you got to pump it full of water to raise and lower it, and they can't get water from another place. Now, they need our Army Corps of Engineers, and they need a bunch. So that's the reason that I would peg it more like about 40% rather than like 10%. So, but
well, and the other thing is with all the immigration that's happening, the Darien Gap and all that stuff, the path people are coming, they go somewhere in the vicinity of that. And there's this, I saw a picture of it. There's this huge building, like an old military building, like kind of like a White House looking kind of thing on just hundreds or maybe even thousands of acres. And that's where whoever in our military kind of oversaw operations, that's where they lived. And that's now basically shuttered, and we have no presence there. And all these people are coming in through the Darien Gap and right through that area. It seems to me like it would be much easier to head things off there than waiting until they get to Brownsville, Texas.
Now, let me say two things about that, though. One, you've probably heard that the Mexican government just literally right now, is got this idea of grabbing people that are making their way north and dispersing them and they're sending them to Acapulco. They're sending lots of people to Acapulco, making it hard to get here. So I think the Mexican government is going to take care of a lot of the migration problem, a lot of the illegal immigration problem. But here's what I would give a higher percentage to in terms of the Panama Canal. I would put it maybe at a 60% chance that there would be some co-regency between the U.S. and Panama of the canal. So I think it's a low chance that Panama gives it up altogether. I don't think we could probably pay them enough to make them do that. I mean, what else do they have? I mean, they don't really have much. They got, farms and stuff. But I think on the flip side, it could be like, here's my opening gamut. I want the canal. I'll pay, $100 billion for it. No, we're not going to do that. But I'll tell you what, Trump, if you invest $50 billion, we'll own the thing, but we'll sign a 100-year management lease with you, and so we'll essentially have co-regency of the canal. See, I think my own guess, and I haven't read this anywhere or heard this anywhere, but my guess is that's the end game. I think co-regency.
Yeah, I think for all these things, including the Gulf of America renaming, this is the opening of negotiations.
It is.
There's other things that are more plausible or realistic or likely that he knows are the outcomes that he's really going for. Right. But he starts bidding here, and like we'll meet in the middle somewhere. But so for those two, it seems to me like that's what's happening. The fascinating thing for me though is looking at Canada, not because I think Canada is going to become a state. I don't think, and quite frankly, I would rather give Canada, California, Oregon, and Washington. Sorry, Dave. And we take out whatever area in Canada is just north of like Montana. Like we'll do an equal land exchange. They can have our West Coast.
Saskatchewan.
Yeah, we'll take the middle Yeah, we'll take the middle of Canada. I would be in favor of that. But anyhow, uh, what's fascinating to me though is Trump has done more in 2 months not being the president on the geopolitical landscape,
Yes,
in my
that's true.
opinion, in a positive way
Yep.
than Biden has done in 4 years. Now, Biden's done
Yep.
tons of things I think are horrible and terrible, and things
Yep.
like, and more like the stuff in Afghanistan and all. There's a long list of things we don't have time to get into that are greater weight than what Trump has done in a couple months, but they're negative. I'm talking about strictly positive things. I mean, I've never seen in my lifetime a president elect have this kind of influence on masters of industry like Zuckerberg and Bezos and Elon, like all coming to and who's the guy from Apple, Tim Cook from Apple, going to Mar-a-Lago, and like all these folks. But on the geopolitical landscape, Trudeau just resigned, which all indications are he sees something coming that he doesn't want to be a part of. His minister of whatever finance resigned a week or two ago. Like, meaningful things are happening there, and I don't think they would have happened if it was a Kamala Harris president.
Oh, no, they wouldn't have. It would have been business as usual, and no bold moves. Just be another nation and kind of call it good, and don't ruffle anybody's feathers. Don't ruffle Iranians' feathers.
Yeah.
I mean, here's
I truly don't understand this part. The Greenland thing in Panama Canal, I kind of wrap my head around. What's truly going on with the Canada situation? I don't really understand what's going on there.
Well, I do. So one, I think Trump's negotiating and his media tactic, and I've read this. I think this is not just my theory, but I've read this, is flood the zone. So in other words, say so many things that they can't respond. So it's like the Gulf of America.
The Gulf of America thing, I think squarely falls in that category for sure.
100% that. I mean, who cares? Who cares whether they call it the Gulf of America, the Gulf of Cuba? Who really gives?
Well, the people cared about the Robert E. Lee statues. Like that, people care about this stuff, Dave.
That's right. Yeah, I'm talking about normal people. So I think Trump's thing is if you look at, so here's kind of how I would slice these things. So Greenland doesn't look so crazy when you think Trump said, I want to make Canada the 51st state. If you just said Greenland by itself and didn't say anything else, didn't say anything about Panama, didn't say anything about Canada,
agreed.
It doesn't look so crazy now. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I could see that. So if you change the conversation so completely, and if you just keep throwing things out, I mean, maybe next week it'll be like, Cuba, I kind of had my eye on that for a while.
Well, Mexico seems like why not? If you're going to have Greenland and Alaska, you might as well have Canada, and then if you're going to have that, you might as well have Mexico. Like all of our border issues goes away, all of our cartel issues go away. Like,
yeah, and you
why not just become North America?
And you don't have to renegotiate the USMCA like he wants to do.
Right.
So you just kind of go with it. Yeah, it just becomes much easier. So if you're going to be an empire, just be an empire. Just call it good.
Right.
So I think that's his strategy. I think his strategy is flood the zone, keep the news cycle going. So it's like, well, Trump but didn't you hear he said the Gulf of America now? And next week it'll be, we're going to take over.
Let me ask you this. I heard this theory last night on or a couple nights ago on Gutfeld. He had a similar theory where his like the Wizard of Oz thing, like a distraction over here while the man behind the curtain is really pulling the levers, meaning getting actual policy like put through without a lot of taking a lot of fire from the media, because the media is so worried about Canada being the 51st state. They focus on that. Meanwhile, he gets real significant policy put in place kind of under the radar.
Right.
But I wonder, my question about this, which is not what they were saying on the Gutfeld show, was does this give cover to the politicians to go along with his actual policy that making this happening, because there is this distraction where they would be heavily scrutinized if there wasn't?
Well, sure, because I think one of the things you could say if you're you're center right or center left politician is well, why did you vote for the appropriations to buy Greenland? Well, we negotiated with the president. We thought that was a better idea than trying to do Canada and trying to take 3 or 4.
We're trying to reach across the aisle.
We're trying to reach across the aisle, come up with a compromise, and so
compromise, yeah.
It's all theater. I mean, he's a master of theater. He's a master of the TV and of all that. So I think that's a big part of it too. I mean, Everybody says it's outrageous, but it sort of works.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would say to Kenny G is at this moment for me, it feels like the moment we've been talking about this for a couple months now, but it feels like the momentum is turning.
Yeah.
And now what that means a year from now or 10 years from now, I have no idea. But for this little moment in time, this little few months or few weeks that we're in, it very much feels like the momentum is turning against all the woke stuff, the intersectionality with the identity politics and like the hierarchy based on immutable characteristics and sexual preferences and things. That stuff feels like it's kind of hit a brick wall in the last, I'd say, 3 months. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I'd say like the last, well,
shortly before the election, it seemed to kind of take a turn around a month before the election. Maybe it even started with Trump's assassination thing. Maybe that's the thing that kind of was like a tipping point.
Yeah.
And then the pendulum started to kind of swing back then. Really got a lot of speed momentum, it feels like to me, around a couple weeks before the election, maybe right at the election or whatever. So momentum is turning, it feels like, but who knows for how long, right?
Right. Well, what do they say about presidents? Presidents always come in with an agenda, and then the times define their actual presidency. So, we'll see what happens in the world.
Yeah. Well, as Dave mentioned in the beginning, we are trying to explain to future generations what this moment in time is like. And also we want to get input from people who are here with us now. So if you think there's something we got right, or you think there's something we got completely wrong, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You can do that Unsilent Podcast or go to a Rumble. They have a great comment section. There's a great place to do it there. And Dave, you got anything else?
That's it, Brian.
That's it. All right. Well, until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.